So let me start straight away and give you a little introduction of what business intelligence is. It's basically, as I mentioned, it's turning data into information. It's indicators of performance. So once this information has been processed into graphs or indicators, we call these KPIs, knowledge indicator performance. And these indicators can be also warnings. So for example, when you're about to run out of stock, or you're about to start making losses because your turnover is below your certain limits, and therefore you need to start cutting down on your costs and stuff like that. So business intelligence can bring a lot of information, useful information to a business. It's also indicators of prediction. What's going to happen in the future? Where are you heading? Do you need to invest? Do you need to get in more employees so as to be able to meet the demand that your business intelligence is forecasting? So business intelligence is really a mix of art and science, and I created this little picture to demonstrate the fact that Mickey Mouse is sitting on top of a sea of data, of numbers, and he plays the apprentice wizard to try and convert this data into plots and graphs and things like this. And at the end of the day, it's really a combination of two skills. One is the need to know how to do analytics with data, so having a mind for such kind of work, including statistical analysis and things like that, and at the same time also having an idea of the business, wanting to know what makes sense, what are the kind of information you need to seek to improve your business. So it does take these two combinations to make successful business intelligence. Somebody with no knowledge of the business will find it very hard to produce meaningful information. Now, typically, when we start talking about data analytics, we typically think about 5 questions. And these are summarized as such. How many? So how many is about numbers. How much? It's about money. So any data which is related to money that you're analyzing. How often? So these are trends. What's happening on a regular basis, and these trends, what can you learn from these trends? And obviously these are time-based trends, so like over a period of 12 months or a period of 4 weeks, or whatever the trend is, whatever the time phase you're going to look the trend over. How quickly something is happening. So that's another level of analysis where you try to find out how quickly you're making losses or how quickly you're making profits. And finally, how likely, which is the predictive analysis. And this order of questions actually is also the order of complexity. In other words, doing analysis about numbers of products or numbers of sales or whatever units or how many is the easiest type of analysis. And the most complex is how likely, trying to do predictive analysis. And interestingly enough, also, the amount of data required increases as you go down the list of these questions. In other words, to do how many you can do with 1 month's data, you can start doing some analysis about numbers and stuff like that. You can do a little bit about how much, but you cannot do much about often. With 1 month's worth of data, it's very difficult to look at how often something's happening over a period of months, because you only have one single point of data as such. And similarly with how quickly, and even more so likely with how likely. And really what you need by the time you reach the last questions, you really need to look at about 5 years worth of data to have any meaningful information out of this analysis. So I thought best to try and illustrate all this was to actually take a case study on which I worked a couple of years back. Now this was a mobile phone store, and they had opened in late 2006, And they had all the sales, and when I did this analysis, it was towards the end of 2011. And the store owner wanted to know a little bit more about how we could actually increase his turnover, how we could fine-tune his business, so improve his bottom line, basically. So the question that we're going to ask today is going to be very simple. Is by doing a little bit of analysis based on those 5 questions I've introduced to you, what phones should the shop manager stock and promote to increase their turnover and profit? So obviously he's selling phones, and he has a range of phones from, you can see, from bar phones all the way to Android. Back in those days, Android was just starting. And of course a bar phone is not the same price as a smartphone, and at the end of the day he's only got a certain limited amount of space to stock these phones, and he has to take a decision. Does he stock more bar phones, more flip phones, more smartphones? So we're going to try and help him to answer that question. Moving on, so the first analysis we're going to do is about numbers, and as I pointed out earlier, how many we can look at, so many different questions we can look at. How many phones do we have? How many phones did we sell last month? How many more phones did we sell in the last 3 months? How many questions? There are many questions you do, and the whole idea is to start somewhere, and you need to start looking at some data and answering some of these questions. So ideally, an analyst will start putting together some questions with the help of his manager or his business leader or the director of the company and something like that, and try to see, okay, what kind of questions can we answer with this kind of analysis. And here what I've just done is I've taken the data, which is in a tabular form, and I've just simply plotted it for the month of 2011. For the last year, 2011, I plotted the months on the bottom, and the number of phones sold on the left, on the y-axis. And you can see the color code tells you which phones are stuff. And straight away from this graph, you can see, well, he seems to be selling a lot of bar phones, and the bar phones seems to be his #1 seller. And then when you look at Android, which is in purple, the last one, seems to be increasing from the beginning of January here all the way to December. There's a little bit of an increase in Android phones. The touch phones also seems to be doing quite well. Back in those days, touch phones, you had Samsung touch phones which were not running on Android, so they were separated. And then smartphones, they were everything else from, say, something like a BlackBerry, which was obviously very popular back in those days and stuff like that. The flip phone, on the other hand, the orange one, seems to be the least popular of phones that they're selling. Right? So the question we were asking, what phones should he be stocking? Initially, from this initial analysis, we could say, well, the bar phone obviously seems to be a good selection. The touch phone and the Android phone also seems to be doing relatively good sales. So let's move on to the next analysis, which is how many sales. I mean, I could have done more about how much, but given the span of this lecture, obviously I wanted to run through as many examples in each of those categories. So I just want to move on and show you what we can do now with how much, and doing an analysis of monthly sales. Sorry, I'm skipping. I thought we were on the how much. This is still a how many question. It's not how much spend. But in this case, what I want to analyze is I want to see the delta number of phones. In other words, how many phones are we selling compared to the last month? So every single month this time, I'm plotting the difference between one month and the other. And you can see now, if I do this, we seem to have an increase in the number of Android phone we're selling every month. So every month we have a positive increase in sales relative to the previous month. On the other hand, it seems that all the others seem to be dropping, right? Except for so in 2007, except for the Android phones, all the other phones, they were actually selling less and less month on month. But there are also another interesting trend that you can note from this, and it seems the sales are all peaking. There's a peak of sales happening around about April, right, at the beginning in the month of April, and there's a peak in October, right? So here's an interesting trend about something happening, how often, for example. And you know, I would let you try and guess what is happening in April and why is there a drop in March? Why is there a drop in sales of phones in March and a peak in April? And why is there a peak in October? Without really, I mean, there isn't much of a significant loss, a drop in phone sales in September. So I let you think about this. I'll give you the answer a bit further on down the lectures, so you can figure it out for yourself. So moving on to the next analysis. So here, if we were to look at this analysis, and we were in the light of the question of what phone should be the store manager should be stocking, and he says here we're obviously doing quite well with Android phones. So Android phone is again coming up in the answer, and bar phones of all the other phones, they seem to be the least decreasing in sales. The touch phone seem to be also decreasing, but they're obviously of the compared to the other two, compared to the smart and the flip phones, the decrease in sales is less. So now I want to move on to the next type of analysis, is how much, which is looking at money cost, money analysis. And in the how much, we can ask questions like how much sales did we make last month, how much turnover increase did we make in the last 3 months, what is our cost increase in the last 3 months? All sorts of questions like this that you're going to analyze given the data that most businesses in India would have. I mean, everybody has to keep data. All businesses in India have to keep data in order to fill in tax declarations. So all this data is usually available with any business that you might encounter. So now what we're looking at is the sales of phones in thousands of rupees. So so this, for example, here is 35 lakhs, and here at the bottom is 5 lakh rupees. So you can see, for example, flip phones, the business, the turnover over the month to month is around about 5 lakhs worth of business, while the Android, not surprisingly, seems to be increasing, since we saw the number of sales of Android phones have been increasing in the last analysis. We obviously expect that the turnover to increase. But it's interesting because in the last analysis, we saw that all the other phones seem to be dropping in the number of sales, right? And the total number of phones we were selling month to month was decreasing. There was a net decrease, and yet look at these plots. They all seem to be flat. They don't seem to be showing a decrease in number of phones sold. So what is happening here? Why are we not seeing a decrease in the turnover month to month? Okay. And this is what all these kind of analysis reveal to you, that it's actually a much more complex picture. There isn't just a single trend taking place, and that's why it's important to keep refining your analysis. Okay. Now, if we were to answer the question here, we'd say obviously Android, from a perspective of turnover, Android seems to be doing the best for the business. The touch phones and the smartphones, so the smartphones in pink now is popping up in our analysis, because the smartphones is still contributing, is the second best contributor to the overall turnover of the business, right? And then, of course, from the previous, we could see that the bar phones, we were doing good sales in bar phones, but somehow it's the fourth best contributor to the turnover. So why did we see that trend? And this is what pushed me to do this next analysis. And this analysis is looking at what is the average unit costs of a given phone versus the total number of phones. Okay, so in the average unit cost is plotted in orange here, right? And this is the price of the average units. In other words, I take all the phones we sell every single month, I multiply it by the price of that phone, and then I divide by the total number of phones. And that gives me the average unit cost, right? So how do we read this? For example, in February, we were selling, this store was selling, on average, a unit would be sold for 5,450 rupees, right? But in February, the total number of phones that were sold, which is in the green light, was 1,400 phones. So we are seeing this overall trend of the total number of phones dropping, which we confirmed from our first previous analysis. But what we're seeing on the other hand is we're seeing an overall increase over the year of the average unit cost. And that explains why one offsets the other, and the turnover is actually flat. Okay, I hope that's clear from the and again, note this trend here. March, big drop in total number of sales. April, big increase. And then here, October also we have a peak. What's going on here? Okay, so I'm gonna give you the answer. Some of you might have figured it out. March, April is actually the end of the financial year. And what happens is that everybody knows, well, at least, people who buy new phones on a regular basis, IT kids, people who are working in well-paid jobs and stuff like that, they know that in April they're going to get their bonus. So they're actually waiting to see what is their bonus and to decide are they going to buy, the latest BlackBerry or Android phone they've been dreaming about or whatever. And that's the reason why we're having a drop in March, because a lot of customers who would come to the store are not buying anything in March and are waiting. And come April, once they know their bonus, they decide what phone they're going to buy. They all come in to get their latest phone that they've been wanting. And of course, what happened is in October is we have Diwali, and Diwali is the Christmas of India, where everybody is gifting gifts, and generally speaking, this is also a peak where we expect a lot of sales to happen. And these kind of trends you'll come across many Indian businesses as a result. Okay. Now, of course, that other businesses could have peaks run about here, which is the start of the marriage season, for example. So people getting married, and of course a lot of gift buying around about that period. We should expect this trend to extend all the way into December, because that's a period when there's a lot of marriage taking place in India. Okay, moving on. Samad, I have a message.
Yeah, that is fine. So we can have the session going on.
Okay. If it shuts down, I need to re-log in?
Yeah, reconnect on the same ID.
Okay. So now if we answer the question about, what phone should he stock, here we're not talking anymore about whether it's a bar phone or flip phone, Android. We're really looking about medium to high-end phones is what he needs to be stocking, because there's obviously a net increase in demand for higher-end, higher-priced phones. And this, remember, this average includes bar phones and flip phones, which we expect in general to be lower priced. And therefore, what is pulling this up is more like the touch screens and the smartphones and the Android phones, which generally are more expensive. So one of the answers that we're coming out with this analysis is that we need to really look for medium high-end phones for this particular store. A store maybe located in a different location of the city might have a very different picture. So moving on now, I want to move on to the how often analysis to give you a little snapshot and how complex analysis can get on. And in this type of analysis, the kind of questions we want to answer is things like, how often do we sell below our costs? In other words, in a month, what are the months where we're making losses? And obviously you can look at your overall costs of running that store and keeping certain amount of stock. And then you can say, okay, within this month, I've spent that much money and I've made so many sales, and how often, how many months in the year did I make less sales than my cost? You can ask, like, how often do we sell phones above a certain price? Relative to the last analysis we did, this would be a question. Obviously, once we've analyzed this data and we've given those answers already to the store manager, obviously he would say, okay, well, how often do I sell a phone such as, let's say, the iPhone, which I sell at 30,000 rupees. Back in those days, the iPhone 4 was that price. How often do I sell a phone like that? Is it worth stocking this kind of phone? Because, you know, it might be that medium to high-end phones are the best seller, but maybe at 30,000 he only sells 5 phones a month, and therefore it's no use of him to stock hundreds of phones such as that one. How often do we run out of stock? That's also an interesting question. You know, when you run out of stock, you cannot sell. You know, someone comes to your store and you say, sorry, we're out of stock of Android phones, and that's a loss of business. And this is what we're going to do now. This is the kind of analysis one of the analysis I did about how often he sells is how often do we run out of stock. And what I plotted here is I looked at the remainder stock as a percentage of the last month's sale. Okay, so what it means is that in February, for example, the touch phones, the green line here, we're slightly above 40% in stock of the total number of phones we sold of total number of flip phones we sold in January. Okay, so generally speaking, you want to have stocks between 20 and 50% of your previous month's sales, because that represents about 2 weeks leeway, 1 to 2 weeks leeway in terms of stock relative to what you sold last month. And obviously that's enough delay for the store manager to be able to order some more when he sees, you know, he's going below the 20% mark. And of course, above this, like for example, if you look at flip phones, he was stocking more than 100% of the previous months in February. In March, for example, he was at 140. So he's obviously got way too much stock of flip phones, and this is dead stock. Okay. But on the other hand, if you look at something like the Android phone, which is doing really well, there are many, many months throughout the year. We can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So 6 months, half of the year, he's out of stock. And of course, what's happening here is that this is telling him that he needs to do something about stock management. This is definitely one of the places where he needs to improve, because it means that come the beginning of June, for example, here, you can see in June he made very few sales of Android. Why? Because he had no stock. And he probably had many people coming in, you know, a few people coming in June, and he could have probably increased his, sorry, this is not sales, this is stock. If we were to look at June, he probably made some losses of Android sales, because in May he had sold out completely. So if we were to answer the questions here, we're obviously Android and the bar phone. You can see the bar phone is also running out of stock. And we'd seen from our first analysis of how many phones, right at the beginning of this lecture, that bar phones was his #1 seller in terms of total number of types of phones. So, and he seems to be running out of stock as well. So if he wanted to continue selling bar phones, he would need to really look at, you know, picking up on the stock management here. Now, I want to move on to how quickly and how likely, because these get more complex and a little bit more tricky to explain and to understand. So in the how quickly section, it's about, you know, trying to understand how quickly, for example, we're increasing our turnover. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so as I was saying, the next analysis we want to do is about how quickly something is happening, and now you get the drift, you know, about, you know, what questions you can ask and something like this. But one of the obvious questions we had at this point was, okay, we've seen that there are certain phones that we're increasing in sales. We've seen there are certain phones that are decreasing in sales. So the question was to do an analysis over the last 4 years worth of data that they have, and to see, is this a trend that is, you know, that is just for this year, for 2011, or is it a trend that has been there in the past? And therefore, the whole thing was, how quickly are our sales decreasing or increasing in this case? And in order to be able to actually to be able to do this analysis, we need to start removing the seasonal effects of March and April, end of financial year seasonal effect, where we saw a big drop and a big increase. And then in October we see also this seasonal effect of Diwali, which is actually skewing the data and giving us the wrong impression. It's very difficult to see whether the trend is going up or going down when you have these kind of peaks in the middle of the data. And in order to do this, when we have a large set of data over, in this case, the last 4 years, we're able to actually analyze the seasonal effects year on year and take the average effect and remove it from the data. And so here what I'm showing you is a plot with the seasonal effect removed. So we have the sales of bar phones. The number of phones is plotted on the y-axis, and in the bottom we have the data from January to October. And although we have the previous year in 2007 data, statistically the analysis would be for technical mathematical reasons, the analysis cannot be done on the year before this. You always lose 1 year of data when you do this kind of analysis. So anyway, so we plot from January all the way till end of 2011, January 2008 till 2011, and we look at the trend in bar phones, and you can see the dark blue line is the deseasonalized analysis, and plotted above this is the actual sale as it happened month to month in a dashed line. And you can see the seasonal effect repeating over and over again. So here in March we have this drop, and we have a peak in April. Then back in October we have another peak here. 2009 March, April. Here's March. Here's April. 2009 Diwali. 2010 March, April. 2010 Diwali, and so on and so on. And you can see the same trend repeats as well for flip phones. But the nice thing is that we can see the real trend of sales. In other words, if the seasonal effect were not happening, and we could assume that month to month the same, people don't come into our stores specifically on one month or the other, it's pretty random and we just sell our phones, we would really expect the blue line to show our sales. And now you can see there's a very interesting trend that in 2009 there's a big drop in sales, right? And what happened in 2009? Well, there was a world economic downturn, and of course people were losing jobs in India, and this might have happened to some of your family members. You might know some of your parents or your elder brothers, something like this, who went through this period, and it was very difficult. You didn't know whether you were going to hang on to your job. You weren't going to get much of a bonus, obviously, but salary increases went on. So people were holding back from making any purchases such as phones, and that's why we see this downturn trend. Okay, and although bar phones dropped, and so did flip phones, we can see now that flip phones have been gradually picking back up to above the levels of 2008. And that's interesting because earlier on we were saying flip phones are not being selling and stuff like that. The number of flip phones that we sold in the last 5 years has actually gone through an increase, while the bar phones have definitely gone through a decrease. We're nowhere near the levels of pre-2009. On the other hand, we confirm that in the month of 2011, the last part here, there is a definite decrease here. There's a decrease in this one, but there seemed to be a relative increase till halfway in July, and then of course in the last 6 months of 2011 the flip phones have been decreasing. Now if we do the same analysis, if we answer based on just on this analysis, we see that flip phones for the first time seem to be popping up in our answer about what kind of phones we should be selling, which is an interesting thing. Let's move on to the other type of phones that we have in our list. At this point, I had not put in the touch phones, but I did analysis on the smartphones and the Android phones. And here we can see that the real breaker of all trends is the Android sales. Okay, Android has just, even in 2009, somehow because the sales were maybe very low, I'm not sure, but even the 2009 didn't seem to have much of an effect on sales of Android phone, which is very interesting, right? Although there was a little decrease in 2009 from smartphones, it too didn't have a major drop in 2009. So it would probably show that the economic downturn of 2009 had very little effect on higher end phones. In other words, people with money kept on spending. Yeah, which is, well, you know, if you have money, then obviously if you're the owner of a business, you don't, and your business is still doing relatively well, then obviously you're not affected by the downturn. You still go out and buy yourself the latest Android phone or BlackBerry or whatever it is. Right? And again, we can see the deseasonalized data, the green line. So we can see it that our turnover as the store was, slowly increasing at the beginning. But then there was a drop in 2010. Again, that might have been a later effect of the economic downturn. In other words, the first affected were employees, but the next affected were people who could see, business owners who could see that by 2010 things had not really picked up as yet. And they were obviously trying to cut down on their cost and phones and things like that. But post 2010, post mid 2010, we see a general increase again in smartphones. And that's a good trend for this store. But really the Android phone is the number one seller. So when we answer our question again, really the answer here is Android, Android, Android. Android seems to be the product that the store manager should be concentrating on. Moving on about how likely, this is predictive analysis. And in predictive analysis, what we try to do is we actually try to predict what's going to happen in the future. And this kind of analysis can be done by correlation methods, where we try and correlate data in the past, such as, for example, time related to sales or to number or money or whatever it is. And we try to apply this trend, this correlation over the immediate future. And then it's a combination of deseasonalizing data and getting the seasonal effect, and then plug in the seasonal effect back into the prediction to get the real number. Because obviously month on month, in March we see a drop, in April we see a peak, and then it drops back down again. So you want that seasonal effect to be in your predictive analysis in order to get the real numbers coming out. And this is what we do. In the predictive analytics that I've done here, I've looked at what is the likely total number of phones we're going to sell in the next 3 months. So here we are at the end of 2011, and we're looking at the numbers for January, February, and March, the next 3 months. And you can see I've actually added the seasonal effects, and we can see this trend taking place to a certain extent within the month of March, where the sales seems to all drop relative to the previous month. But there doesn't seem to be such a strong effect, like we were seeing a big drop in some of the previous analysis. And that's probably because the sales in the last 6 months have been on an upward trend. So there seems to be some offsetting thing. And obviously from here we can see that our Android is, for the first time, Android is going to take over the total number of phones sold in the store as the number one phone type seller. The bar phones for the first time is going to drop to second place. Previously, bar phones were, generally speaking, on top, except for here the flip phones in Diwali, October 2000, seem to have a little peak. But generally speaking, the flip phones and the smartphones, although the smartphones seem to be picking up again, in January there's a drop but picking up again, the flip phone seems to be the last of the sales here. And so this is giving you an idea of what predictive analysis can do, and this would help the store manager plan the next 3 months. And that's very useful for him to have that foresight about what is likely going to happen in the next 3 months. So I hope that I've given you a little oversight about business intelligence and how it can help. And in conclusion to our analysis, we can say that Android phones are the future for the store. Furthermore, we need to really look at better stock management. We also saw that there was a growth in higher priced phones. we saw that bar phones are still very popular, but they don't contribute to the revenue growth. I mean, they were the last as far as revenue growth is concerned. So the higher end flip phones contribute to growth as well. We saw that in our analysis. So with this information, obviously it's up to the business manager now, the store owner, to take his decision. And I think we've given him good information for him to make a logic, data-driven, scientific in quotes decision. And surely other smartphones do contribute to the growth as well. But generally speaking, we would expect, you'd think that this store was in a good location of the city where there's obviously a high spenders who come by, and the general outlook looks good. But he needs to fine tune his business. He needs to look at more at higher, medium to higher end phones. He needs to probably do a lot more promotion around Android, advertising, maybe things like this, so as to get more business coming as well. So one of the things that were requested by WeBind is to give you some questions, some problems for you to try out yourself at home. So I got a few brain teasers about, this is general knowledge, and the information is all out there on the internet. It's just a question of you applying some analytical skills to see whether you can come up with some answers. So here's an interesting one, which you can find many people attempting to solve this one on the internet as well, is, do we share water molecules with Swami Vivekananda? This might seem to be a crazy question, but when you know that every 7 years, all the water in your body gets renewed, all the water molecules gets renewed. So in a lifetime of, say, about 70 years, your water molecules get renewed 10 times in your body. And we also know that, our water makes up 60% of our body or more. So the first question you need to ask, you need to solve, is how much water constitutes our body in an entire lifetime? And then the next question you need to ask is, how much total water is present on Earth? And again, this is a question you can actually find answers to on the internet. And with these two, you can figure out, how much water molecules is there in a drop of rain that has actually gone through the body of Swami Vivekananda in his lifetime. And so when you drink a glass of water, the same amount, the same proportion of water molecules are there, and therefore when you take a shower or whatever it is, and some of these molecules are circulated through other people. So here's the first one. Second one, which I thought would be an interesting one for you as well, is it more expensive to live in North or South India? And the idea here is, we're not looking about renting and stuff like that. I just want to think about a day-to-day living. What is the cost of feeding yourself? And what you need to do is figure out what in a typical day, what does a North Indian family eat and what does a South Indian family eat, and then come up with an average pricing for those meals. Okay, so I'm not going to give you too many more hints, but you need to start thinking about those questions on your own and stuff like that. And finally, if you cannot find the answer, you can visit us on bi.syllogic.in, where there's a section fun with business analytics, business intelligence, where you can find out some of these answers and more interesting articles as well that we've published. So that's it. Thanks a lot. Any questions?
Thank you, Doctor, for such a wonderful session. I think we'll be having questions from the college side. Let's give them a minute to get back to us. Certainly from MIT College, may I know if any students have any questions regarding business intelligence? So the person who has a question, ask the person to come towards the laptop and pick up the mic and talk, so that we can understand who's asking the question and we can hear the person. So Doctor, here we have a question coming in.
Okay.
The question is, how do we authenticate data before analyzing the data? And to the source,
Yeah.
how to analyze the source or authenticate the source of the data before analyzing?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and generally speaking, obviously one of the things that needs to be done is you need to start looking at the data entry on a day-to-day basis. Data in most businesses tend to flow in on a day-to-day basis, and although the sales and numbers do change a lot month on month, on a day-to-day basis the changes are not so high. So an interesting analysis to answer that question is, first of all, to see whether there are any missing days. I mean, that's an obvious one. Are there any days which are not holidays but where the data was not entered properly? Or are there days which differ enormously from one day to the next? And then to try and see whether this is a trend. So we would expect, for example, a Saturday or a Sunday, if the store is open on a Sunday, to have a lot more sales than, say, on a Monday. So, but on the other hand, would we expect a Monday to have a lot of sales and then, the previous Sunday or the previous Saturday to be very close to zero? That doesn't seem to make much sense, unless, of course, the Monday was a day off. So there are some analysis you can try and pick out, and you can try to look through the data and do some analysis to try and figure out whether the data there is a consistency in the data. And then, of course, as you start doing the analysis itself, you will start to see certain trends which you ought to be able to explain year on year. So, for example, the seasonal effect. Is the seasonal effect constant from one year to the next? If it's not, then you need to start questioning the data of that year. If there's one year where the seasonal effect doesn't show through, you need to question the data of that year. You can look at seasonal effect on a weekly basis as well, and therefore question seasonal effects on a monthly basis, if there's a month that seems to be sticking out from the seasonal effect. So there are quite a few things that, as you progress in your analysis, you do have a reinforcement of the validity of the data, or you have, on the other hand, some questions arising as to the validity of it.
Okay.
But generally speaking, the more a business has got IT tools and is interconnected and things, the better the data collection is. And inversely, when a business is small and everything is collected by hand on an Excel sheet or something like this, then there is a lot more question about the data.
Do we have any other questions coming in from the students? So we have another question coming in here.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we decide on the type of chart and the selection of the chart for plotting the data to get the right insight? So we have various types of charts, and how to decide what data to put on what chart to get the best insight.
Yeah. Well, this is where the arts starts to step in. One of the difficulties I had when I was working in the corporate world, and I was heading some of these departments of analysis and performance, I had to recruit people for this kind of jobs, and it was actually very difficult to find people who try to think out of the box in terms of presentation analysis. And in fact, the second question on the brain teaser that I gave you was one of the questions I asked, with a little bit more detail, that I asked my potential employees, interviewees, and it's actually, it might seem to be a very simple, straightforward question, but people were doing all sorts of simplistic analysis without really putting their mind to it, and I think one of the core ingredients to be successful in this kind of analysis is you really have to think. You really have to use your mind and start to think about putting yourself into the shoes of the store owner, putting yourself in the shoes of the salesperson behind the store, putting your shoes in the person of the client, and seeing what kind of logic does someone come in when they look at to buy a phone, for example, and it's pretty obvious. You look at what is the trend? You look at switch on a TV and see what are the phones being advertised. And these are the phones that people dream of having, you know, the latest iPhone, the latest BlackBerry, the latest Android or Samsung or whatever. So when you see this information that is around you all the time, it should have an impact on your question making, like saying, okay, you know, what are the percentage of people even asking for maybe to look at an iPhone within store? I don't know if this is the kind of data that people do, you know, store or not, but it might be something that if you interview a salesperson within the store, he might be able to say, yeah, at least I get at least 5 people asking for an iPhone in a day or something like this. And this could be interesting data also to look at. So it's very much a question of think through your analysis. And generally speaking, once you start thinking through and you start asking the right question, you tend to, of course, with experience and, you know, the more experience you have, you tend to come up with the right chart. And believe me, if you come with the wrong chart, you'll know it. You know, the chart will be difficult to read and you know, it's not very obvious. When you show it to your business leader or something, he needs to be able to pick up the information on the charts very quickly. If your chart is too complex, then obviously something is wrong with it. So it's very much an art.
Yeah. So that's a nice answer, sir. So we have one more question coming in. I think students need to know this. The question is, what is the skill set that is paramount to make a career in BI?
Well, one thing is some experience in business. I mean, it's one thing to learn business in college. It's another thing to actually run a business. Once you've actually been running a business, either as yourself or with a family, or even being, you know, if you're close to the people who run businesses, you know, you're close to the business owner and you interact with them on a daily basis. So you see what are the decisions that need to be made, what are the questions that are being asked. That's very important to have some kind of that, you know, a bit of that experience. And then obviously the other one is a head for numbers, being able to understand numbers, being able to see trends, being able to ask the kind of questions. A lot of the analysis I've done today, as far as the statistical methods are concerned, they're all available on the internet, and you can look up business intelligence analysis on the internet. It gives you, you know, this decentralized analysis. It's all available on the internet to do on an Excel sheet and so on. So you don't really need to know much about statistics in itself. You just need to be able to understand numbers, you know, what is averaging, what is accumulation, what is maybe correlation analysis. That's a little bit more complex, and you probably need to have a little bit of a mathematical background maybe to do some of the stuff. But it's not rocket science at the end of the day. And you know, you might be able to actually hire somebody who has good statistic analysis, and you guide them. You tell them, I want to do such kind of analysis. And they might not understand the business. You will be the one who has the understanding of both sides and really be the brains behind the analysis as such.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have a question coming in from the college. Someone wants to talk from there. So Shalini, could you please ask the person to come forward and ask the question to the doctor?
Did you ask me a question, Samad?
Yeah, one sec. Shalini? Yeah, the person is here. She wants to ask you. Yeah.
Tell me.
How do we account for the favorable and unfavorable factors like disposable income, inflation, recession by analyzing the data in predictions? So how do we account for those factors?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of very interesting statistics being maintained by the Bureau of Indian Statistic Analysis. You can find the data online, and in fact I've used this to do various types of analysis in the past, where, for example, especially looking at predictive analytics, and you can see what is the inflationary pressures on certain types of products. So depending on the business you're looking at, and especially if it's a manufacturing business, what will be the inflationary pressures on their raw materials, and what is the impact of that pressure on cost of sales and cost of manufacturing, and obviously cost of sales eventually, and things like that, and sales at the end of the day. So again, paramount is good data, and unfortunately, for example, some of the data which is available on the Bureau of Indian Statistics is actually quite limited. Sometimes it's patchy as well. So it all depends on what data you're looking at. There are good data, for example, in the farming industry. There's excellent data there. There is good data as well coming from corporate businesses. For example, on attrition rates and things like this, that they have to publicly list companies to give out, and this can be also very interesting for service-based companies and doing analysis on that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, welcome. So just for your information, if you're interested in reading more about such kind of analysis for small and medium-sized businesses, I've written a couple of articles on the Indian Analytics magazine. It's an online magazine. If you come to the websites that I listed, my BI dedicated website, you can actually pick up some of those links to those articles. So I've written an article specifically about indicators for SMEs. And in one of these articles, I actually look at inflationary pressure as well, on a more advanced analysis. Yeah. Any more questions? Thank you.
So thank you, Doctor, for such a wonderful session. I'm sure the students must have got really useful insight on business intelligence from this session. It was great to have you on our platform, Doctor. Thank you once again.
Sure. Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Have
a good day.
For Doctor once again.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.
Students, there's just a small announcement. We'll be having certificates for the session. So those who wish to have the certificates for the session, please get in touch with Ms. Jalmali Birla there, and we'll courier the certificates to her, and you can collect from her. So thank you for being a wonderful audience for WeBind. Thank you so much. Thank you.